Hello, everyone. It's a great honor to be here speaking to you today. And my name is Anssi Pitkänen, and a background in philosophy, and I received my degree from the University of Helsinki. And I have no conflicts of interest to declare. And the topic I'm going to talk to you today about is naturalizing the inner healer. And I propose that, or I'm aiming at the definition of the inner healer and to show that we could that way reconceptualize psychedelics as autopoiesis-enhancing agents. And autopoiesis means self-organizing. And biological systems are paradigmatic examples of these self-organizing systems. And my work draws heavily on the work of Evan Thompson, who is a philosopher at University of Toronto, and who argues that life and cognition are on the same continuum of phenomena. And he draws from a large variety of different frameworks, and I aim to use those frameworks to apply his thinking on the subject of psychedelics, especially the inner healer. So what is this inner healer? Well, basically the inner healer is this belief that psychedelic compounds have an intrinsic mind and brain, analogous to intrinsic healing mechanisms within the physical body, like healing of wounds, etc. So there's this kind of belief in an intelligence or some kind of a healer that's able to heal us from different kinds of mental suffering. But this raises many kind of philosophical questions, because like, what is the inner healer? Is it like God acting on us? Or is it, in the case of ayahuasca, like some kind of a entity called Mother Ayahuasca? Or is it like some kind of little elves like swimming around in our blood and then like fixing stuff? Well, I don't believe that too much. And I really strive to give a scientific account so that we could use like our best frameworks to try to give a definition of what the inner healer could be. So my main proposition is that what has been called the inner healer in psychedelic literature can be naturalized to mean the autopoietic capacities belonging to all biological organisms, and that autopoiesis-enhancing agents, like psychedelics, simply broaden the possibilities of what can be reorganized by increasing entropy in the brain and also making the brain more interconnected. These are like some ways this could happen. And the main point is that psychedelics can be seen as enhancing the natural capacity of cognition to self-organize. And it's important to note that self-organization is going on all the time in our perception and motor action, in our feelings and in our intuitions. It's just that psychedelics make these natural capacities more pronounced, and the variety or the depth that they can reorganize is increased by psychedelic action. And I want to introduce some key concepts that are like really important here. And the first is autopoiesis, which just literally means self-producing. And a paradigmatic example of an autopoietic system is a living cell, because cells have an internal reaction network that they use to regulate their own boundary conditions, so that they can self-organize without any kind of central controller. So that's what the autopoiesis means. And the point is that also cognition is self-organizing in a similar kind of manner. And the second concept is complexity, which describes behavior that is neither random nor ordered and predictable, but it's somehow in between. It is like it leads us to these non-linear dynamics that are really hard to predict in advance. And they have their own kind of order, but it's not easily predictable. And we also have this concept of metastability that's featured in psychedelic literature quite often. And a system is metastable if it has many different kinds of possible states where it can be. But it might be have to nudge there to another state through some kind of a perturbation to the system. And for example, depression is an example of a state that can be maybe sometimes even too stable. But also living a healthy life, a healthy emotional life can also be a stable state. And a human being is metastable because we can live in either kinds of these states and many states in between. And some key resources that I have used and borrowed from Evan Thompson are dynamical systems theory, the enactive view on cognition, and constitutional intentionality that I will elucidate next. But first I will say a few words about actually psychedelics and the brain. And I used the pivotal mental states by Carhart Harris et al. To borrow this material. So during the acute function of psychedelics, or the acute action, the normal functional segregation of different brain areas is replaced by a globally interconnected profile. And also psychedelics have been shown to increase cortical neuroplasticity, and psychedelics increase spontaneous brain activity. This has also been called increased entropy, information richness, and it's make the activity of the brain more unpredictable, which is to say more complex. And this increased complexity also is pretty much the same thing as saying that the brain is in an increasingly metastable state. And taken together, these effects point to a greater potential for this cognitive reorganization. And the first theoretical research that I want to introduce is dynamical systems theory. And it's a qualitative approach to dynamics or change. And it seeks to predict the global character of change in the system instead of predicting specific details. So using this theory, we want to have the capacity to predict like some very specific parameters, but we can't predict the global or the general change. And an important concept here, or in this theory, is state space, which is the collection of all possible states of the system. And if the system is very complicated, the collection of all possible states is also very large. And then we can like visualize the change by thinking about trajectories in the space. For example, that if we're like going from state A to state B, might not be able to go there directly. There must be sometimes some in-between states. And these trajectories are like the ways that the system moves from one state to the next. And the second is enactive view on cognition, and it works really well with dynamical systems theory. And we can think about it as dynamical system theory as applied to understanding cognition and mind. And the enactive view can be characterized by three main insights, which are that living beings bring forth their own cognitive domains. And this is to say that what kind of cognitive domains we have depends on our biological structure. So we have different cognitive domains as human beings than, for example, bats or ants, because our biological structure is so different. We have different kind of perceptual abilities, different kind of feeling, different kind of thinking, different kind of intuition, if ants can think anyway. And the nervous system, or the second insight is that the nervous system generates and maintains its own activity, which is to say that the nervous system is self-organizing. An important point here is also that in this view, the nervous system does not process information in a computational sense, but instead it's like a meaning generation machine. And living beings orient their life worlds to generating meaning. And the third insight is that cognitive world is not pre-specified externally. So the kind of world that we inhibit as cognitive beings depends on our biological structure, but also on the previous experiences that we have had before. And the final concept that I want to introduce is constitutional intentionality. And in phenomenology, intentional experiences are experiences about something. They have a kind of directedness to them. And intentional experiences are conceptualized as acts having directedness. So even a very simple experience like seeing a tree is already analyzed to be an act of. And for example, if I see a tree, I can see it as a very neutral thing. Or in a different state of mind, I can see it like a manifestation of extreme beauty. Or in a very different state of mind from that, I could see it as some kind of nightmarish manifestation. So events get their meaning through the activity of the network, in this case the brain, and the meaning of events is not pre-specified. And the most important takeaway from this concept is that according to constitutional intentionality, the meaning of a given experience depends on the structure of the network. And now, I want to bring this insight of constitutional intentionality together with psychedelics. And we could think that therapeutic change is essentially adaptive modification to the directedness of the autonomous networks that we have on our brain. And that psychedelics can modify this directedness through causing perturbations in the brain and then forcing the brain to creatively respond to them. And in the act of responding to these perturbations, the brain is making meaning out of them. So it's like generating meaning out of its own perturbations. And in this activity, the networks are undergoing change because according to constitutional intentionality, the meaning that we have to our experiences corresponds to network undergoing change. And now, with these kind of conceptual resources, I can try and give a working definition on the inner healer. So the inner healer in the dynamical systems theory terms could be the spontaneous adaptive modification of constitutional intentionality through the self-correction of internal perturbations catalyzed by the action of psychedelics on cortical entropy. And I know that this can sound like quite a lot, but we have already covered this actually during the previous parts. And this is my working definition. And we have arrived like quite far from mother ayahuasca and similar kind of constructs. And the definition can be broken into three parts, which are maybe easier to analyze. So the first part was the spontaneous adaptive modification of the constitutional intentionality. So the insight here was that the structure of the network mirrors the meaning that we give to our experiences. And the second one was the self-correction of internal perturbations. So I make a hypothesis here that the psychedelics challenge the brain to make meaning out of the increased perturbations that are caused by this action. And through this definition, I hope I have shown here that we could reconceptualize psychedelics as these autopoiesis-enhancing agents. And that the so-called inner healer is basically autopoiesis observed on the level of cognition. And that under the influence of psychedelic, the attractor states, or the stable states that the system has a tendency to fall into, this can undergo rapid transformation, which leads to new ways of attributing meaning, or essentially they are these new ways of attributing meaning. And psychedelics can make this meaning attribution change very fast, and then we could predict that this means the same thing that the attractor states are undergoing, this rapid transformation. And we can propose that this capacity for healing through autopoiesis has an evolutionary background on the evolution of the 5-HT2A receptor and the subsystem that it works on. And I used only 3 sources to compose this particular lecture and a pinch of philosophical creativity. And here's my contact information if any questions, comments, or requests. And finally, thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you. That was a highly interesting and concise presentation. We have lots of time for questions and comments, several here. So we take 1, 2, 3, 4 for the moment. I try to remember.
Thank you, Anssi. You talked a lot about cognition and the psyche, and I would like to bring that the inner healer, and especially also with psychedelics, don't only work on the psyche, it also works in your body, and let's say it can really help healing, whether it's muscular or whether it's like even like cancerous or something like that. So it's not only in the psyche, and inner healer, a good example of what Mithoff first taught us in MAPS training was that if you have a cut, let's say a wound on your arm, like let's say a doctor can like maybe like clean it and then like stitch it together, but your body is the inner healer kind of like does the healing, and that's a good example of that's just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. My question is, what would be the benefits of utilizing this autopoiesis instead of inner healer in context of psychedelic therapy? What are your thoughts on this?
Good question. I'm not sure if that has actually any additional value for the actual people who are like participating in clinical trials or seeking personal healing from psychedelics, but this proposal is more to elucidate our own understanding as a scientific community, what we're talking about when we talk about like inner healer or inner healing intelligence, because I think even though the concept has a lot of like intuitive value, and I think the inner healer is like a very good shorthand for something much more complex that is happening. But I think that we shouldn't like as a scientific community leave the our understanding on that kind of level. We should strive to give a more scientific account, and that's what I've been striving for.
I was also thinking about the blurred lines in like this inner healer idea is somehow connected to other kind of similar ideas that have external functions as well, like a higher self or like a superego from Freud, or maybe individuation from Lacan, or even like self-actualization from Maslow. You know, I mean, these are in relations to society, or maybe like the abstract idea of finding a place to be or peace, which is like intersubjective. So I was just thinking that only centering into the workings of the mind and like dismissing the social dynamics at play of what healing means in the sense of inner healer even is something to be like thought about. This is not actually a question. I was just thinking about the broader consequences of this idea.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. 2 or 3 part question. So, if we define psychedelics as enhancers of self-organization, this is actually a bit related to the last question. That, well, first of all, as opposed to what? What's the alternative to self-organization? And if one, there's probably many answers to that, but if one answer is kind of controlled by external circumstances, then is it really realistic or even desirable to, I don't know, get rid of that or something? So what self-organization as opposed to what, and is it desirable and why?
Good question. I think the alternative is some kind of action that comes from outside, as you said. For example, I mentioned that there are beliefs that the healing that psychedelics make possible comes from some kind of an agency that the substances themselves contain. Like, for example, the spirit of ayahuasca. There are a lot of people who believe that it's not the self-organization, it's some kind of a spirit or an entity. So I think the view is really different if you conceive this kind of healing from happening from intrinsic dynamics to the biological system itself, or to some kind of like other entities doing the work. So that is maybe the main difference.
Hi, thank you. What are some intuitions you have about why it's so difficult to achieve self-organization without psychedelics? Because given that psychedelics are so rapid, why don't we do that in sober states? Any thoughts?
Excellent question. I think that the attractors or the stable states can be really powerful, and in a way it's good that they are, because they keep our ordinary human activity together in a way. So if we would always be in a state of like really increased metastability, we'd also be quite fragile, because our normal ways of coping with the world would start to break down quite easily. So it makes sense that that the state to change like very fast and very radically is some kind of is like a function that should not be at work in very ordinary circumstances, but instead should be reserved for like very special ones, if that makes sense.
Yeah, following up on that, I think one of the most intriguing ideas about the evolutionary function of the serotonin system is that it would be especially activated in situations of crisis, for example, a natural disaster that shakes everything up, and therefore some sort of endogenous increased serotonin system activity would enable people or other animals to calibrate their behavior to the new situation. And would you talk a bit about that idea? I think Winkelmann is at least one person who has talked about this.
Yeah, I regard this as very plausible, and I currently take the view that the 5-HT2A receptor system has probably evolved to do that kind of an action, so that in like very special circumstances that are like highly stressful, or that there is like lot of stressors going on, and then some kind of very strong stressor suddenly comes up, and the system has to undergo some kind of a very radical transformation to be able to cope. Like a kind of that the current way of doing things is just like no more viable, and there needs to be a change to the main driving attractors of the system to like gain a new kind of stable state. But the differences between, or the distances between the stable states can be very large. And one way to approach what like metastability is all about is that it kind of decreases the distances between states that in ordinary mental states would be like very, very distant to each other. But suddenly in this metastable state, catalyzed by psychedelics, or maybe some kind of distances between states that are very far from each other suddenly become like closer to each other, and the state or the change becomes possible.
Yeah, just as a brief follow-up comment to that. So evolutionary, it would make sense that such a system would develop because organisms that would have a stronger functioning of that kind of a system would be more able to both survive like really massive catastrophic situations, but also like in regular, like smaller scale challenges. Yeah, thanks for the answer. And you can follow up.
Possibly. There's the additional complexity that human beings are like super plastic creatures, and we can like in a single lifetime go through so much change, like what drives us and what we aim for. So it could also be possible that in the human organisms is like ability to change has been accepted, so that for example, value changes become possible. I'm not sure that you could like really investigate, for example, value changes in animals. But in humans, these kind of really radical changes to what drives us become possible. And to me, it makes some sense that that kind of evolutionary subsystem has been accepted to that kind of function where we can change during our life cycle in radical ways also. So it's possible that there has been some evolution of the subsystem, like during the evolutionary time that our lineages have been differentiating from our primate ancestors. But this is speculative for me at least, and I would really like to know a lot more about like how has this subsystem evolved from the time that we had primate ancestors.
Right, thanks for your great presentation. I was wondering about that question about sober states and this self-organizing function. I was wondering if this could be applicable to like psychotherapy. I think we have some evidence that psychotherapy in combination with SSRIs can be even more effective than psychotherapy alone. I think there's some evidence for this, if I'm not wrong. And SSRIs increase plasticity in some sense. I wonder if this could be applicable in that sense to the sober states as well, like the previous one question asked.
In psychotherapeutic settings, what's going on is often is that we're playing with meaning attribution. The patient has some kind of life meanings that are often problematic, and then they can elucidate like what their problem is from their perspective. But then during the therapy, the therapist can also present other ways of approaching these situations, because like even in ordinary states, the meaning that we give to events is mirrored by some kind of structural equivalent in the brain. So we could think that if there is some kind of a meaning attribution going on in the therapy, and the patients start to shift those meanings on those problematic areas, there also should be a corresponding change in the brain networks. So I think that autopoiesis is also going on in a very similar manner in just ordinary therapy, because there, according to this framework, at least there has to be a structural change to the brain networks if there is a different kind of meaning attributed to the experience.
So it has been shown that psychedelics, they directly bind the receptor of BDNF, even when you block the 5-HT2A system. So what do you make of that? I think that the 5-HT2A is not like the
only thing that is going the autopoiesis working. There are, of course, additional factors to learning and to cognition, that even though the 5-HT2A receptors would be blocked, there are also other avenues for change. It's just this kind of like super fast and radical change that is made possible by the 5-HT2A. But of course, like in any kind of gradual change, there has to be like some kind of autopoietic mechanisms that make the change possible, and also to like make the change lasting. So I think that those can be like separated, that the 5-HT2A system is not the only avenue to change.
Yes, thank you for the presentation, and something that you actually just touched on about how to make these changes in organization lasting. This question of integration, from your point of view, what are some of the factors that enable these radical changes that may appear in self-organization to stick long after the experience? And why is it that sometimes they don't, and sometimes this change is only temporary?
Very good question. It might depend on how deep the changes are to the organization. Like, for example, we can play with the idea that we shift a meaning to like some important life area, but that could be like just a thought that doesn't have like any kind of effect on how we're actually operating. And maybe like some kind of psychedelic epiphanies can also be very meaningful at the time that they occur, but it can be hard to retain them. And I think that then we have to shift from this kind of radical change perspective to how to uphold a gradual kind of path. And that, I think that the integration would be approached then according to this model, so that you create some kind of internal model of the attractor that you would like to have, so that you have like a stable state that you have a tendency to fall into, but you don't have the attractor right now, but you have like felt it at the moment, and you would like to be that kind of a person and be driven by those kind of values or those kind of states in the future. But I think that actually relates highly to what Juuso said previously. So I think that we're moving from the this kind of super fast and radical change more to some kind of aspirational processes. And it is very much, or it is highly likely, I think, that some kind of religions and wisdom traditions have evolved to answer to that kind of question, that how do we move from this kind of short-lived epiphanies to more lasting change. Yes.
Thank you for the excellent talk and excellent discussion.